we are talking of reality, and the reality is that today in Kyiv, there is an air attack. So people is in the shelter and students can't show up in class. So unfortunately and totally unpredictable, but not unexpected, we will not have students on the other side, but also on this side, while on the other hand, we are happy to have with us Anna and Anton from Kyiv University, who will tell us the story as seen from their side. These are things beyond our control, but it's also a way to understand how things are from the field. Now leave the floor to Anna and Anton. Anton and Anna are from the University of Kyiv, the Mohyla Academy. I hope I pronounce it well. They are partnered with us in this big European project. And the main purpose of the meeting today was to give you a picture of what the Ukrainian public thinks about the war, being on the forefront of this war, and what kind of support they can count on from the European side. And we will see that there are problems also here. I leave the floor to Anna for sharing her own slides, and thank you very much for being with us.
We will talk about what Ukrainians think about European support and let's say geopolitical orientations. We have this question frequently asked in surveys: do you believe that Ukraine will win the war? And as you can see, there is like over 90% do believe that Ukraine will indeed win the war. And this is the data from September 2023. And more or less this question is asked in different polls and different variations almost every 2 months. And this data is from one of the biggest sociological survey group rating. What should be said that I think it's very significant here that over 70% actually say a definite yes to that. And if we analyze the dynamics over last 2 years, we do not have any significant changes here. So it's more or less 2% one way, 2% the other way, but the level of belief doesn't change. Of course, the question doesn't say what the win is or what the victory is. So everyone is actually can think their own definition into this question. But I think it's very significant for the general, to understand the general gist of what people feel in Ukraine. Even when, as today, we have another air raid and another hits and so on and so forth. This is also another question about the perspectives of the results of the war, and what will be the questions on what will be the territorial boundaries of Ukraine as a result of this war. And again, you see that overwhelming majority, 68%, almost 70%, so it's slightly more than 2/3, actually believe that Ukraine will maintain all territories from within its international recognized borders defined in 1991. And again, this presents the current mood, and this question also has been asked quite frequently. And this is the data from the same poll from September 2023, and which again shows that any talk about, if there is any talk about negotiations now on or freezing the situation, it won't be supported by Ukrainian public. This data is actually from another of our Horizon project, and this so you only need to see the lowest bar, which is about Ukraine, because the project compared several countries. But in the question, the project on democracy support. So the question asked has been, is democracy the best political system for the development of our country? And as you can see, again, more than two-thirds, I would say, like or here it's more than 75% of Ukrainians actually strongly agree or agree with this answer, and more than half actually strongly agree with that. I should have mentioned that all the data I present to you is actually from all nation representative polls. So we are talking about the data representative for and the surveys representative for all Ukraine, apart from the regions which are temporarily occupied now, or the regions on the front line. So basically, if anyone is interested, we can share the details about the particular territories. But other than that, this is representative data. Another question from the same poll is that we've done for another Horizon project is the question whether you agree with the statement, I share European values of human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and human rights. And here you can see that over 70% actually definitely agree with that, and another 16 agree with that. So overall, you have almost 90% of people agreeing that they share these values, which are defined and understood by them as European values. When we were preparing for this poll, we actually analyzed the previous data from the previous research, and with the information is this data is actually very much coherent and corresponds to what's been found by others. Please. This is a bit of a provocative question, whether people feel that traditional values, in whatever way they define traditional values, are threatened by European values. And here I probably should elaborate. I'm not sure how well you know, but this concept of traditional values is one of the very persistent narratives in Ukraine, which has been used as opposing a pro-European orientation, or even, I would say, liberal democracy orientation. So that's why it's very important that in Ukraine, majority, you'll see it's over 60% would disagree with that, and over 40, like 44, will definitely disagree with that. And you can see that it's also important that another 16 is actually neither here nor there, so probably they're not sure what is meant here. That also could be the definition, but you can see that actually this question corresponds actually to the narrative that what is perceived as European values is also perceived by people in Ukraine, by Ukrainian population, as values that is inherent for Ukrainians. We'll go to the next slide. This is again the data from the rating survey done in June-July 2023, and it actually combined online panel for Ukrainians in Europe, and computer-assisted telephone interviews for those who are within Ukraine. So here you see in parallel the data for support for Ukraine's accession to the EU. And I would say that as evident from these diagrams, more than 80% either of Ukrainians within Ukraine or Ukrainians who are currently in Europe support joining. We can speculate why there is slightly like 2% less for Ukrainians in Europe, but I would say that could be just an artifact from the methods and from the methodologies. In any case, that is not a statistically significant difference. And again, here the support for Ukraine's accession to the NATO, and you see that more or less it's within the same percentage. So it's 83 for Ukrainians in Ukraine, 86 for Ukrainians in Europe, and again, it's not a statistically significant difference either between each part or between Ukrainians in Europe and Ukrainians within Ukraine. You also can see in bars charts the data for different regions, and we can see that while, for example, in the East, the support is slightly lower, it's still over 70%. So while between regions, statistically, the difference is significant, it still demonstrates overwhelming support for the accession to either EU or NATO. And here to put this data into dynamic, this is for the part of polls within Ukraine, where Ukrainians who are in Ukraine are asked, and you can see how the support for the joining of the EU, which is the upper part, or NATO, which is the lower part, changed from 2013 to 2023 to the last data, which is from June, July. And this red line marks the full-scale invasion. It's in February 2022. And you can see that there is there is an overwhelming change which is for you, it's almost 20% change from what would be the beginning of the I think the poll was taken in the beginning of February 2022, and the next data is from March 2022. So within a month, you can see the change that for the joining of the EU, it's almost 20%, and for the joining of the NATO, it's more than 15%, or around 15%. So you see how the full-scale invasion influence, it's really consolidated the opinion of Ukrainians toward joining Euro-Atlantic structures, if we can call it like that. This is a rather, again, provocative slide. It is it's about how Ukrainians think about the, as it said here, usefulness and sufficiency of EU support for Ukraine. So as you can see, that majority is very appreciative and of the support and think that it's very useful. So for the question, how do you evaluate the usefulness of EU effort to support Ukraine? 75% said that it's very useful. At the other hand, majority doesn't think that it's sufficient enough. So you can see over half of respondents actually said that they think that the support is not sufficient enough. And this data is actually, I would mark this slide is from the Kyiv International Institute survey done for European Consultancy Mission in September 2023. So the end of my rather short and brief presentation. But if there is any questions, I would be happy to answer, or probably it will be more to the end of.
Thank you, Anna. So I can move to my presentation that, as a matter of fact, show a quite different picture of what's going on this side of the European planet. This is for Anna and Anton. This last week was devoted to the role of public opinion in foreign policy. So let me start with some general statements on why it might be important to study the role of European public opinion in the Ukrainian war. And in order to do so, I will make two theoretical points. Then I will present my data, and the data we have are data that, of course, due to the fact that the main question we want to address is whether support for the Ukrainian side, support for Ukraine is still strong or is weakening. We needed comparative data, and so we will make a comparison between two surveys run by Eurobarometer between April 2022 and April 2023 to see if there is any difference and in which directions these differences are going and what might be the sources of these differences. So, without any further delay, let me say that there are two reasons why it is important to study the role of public opinion, European public opinion, in the Ukrainian war. One is, let's say, domestic related to the EU, within EU political dynamics, and the other one is external, related to the image and the role that the EU want to convey vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia. As to the first, our major source of concern, and this is where public opinion becomes relevant, is related to the possible politicization of the Ukrainian war. Politicization means that this topic can become a source of controversies among European parties. And there are two reasons why this is a real possibility. First is that in Europe there is a cleavage between left and right on what to do about Ukraine, with the right much less supportive of our effort in helping Ukraine than the left, and right-wing parties much less supportive of this effort than the left-wing parties. The second source of possible politicization is that Europe is in an electoral period. You might all know that on May, June 2024, there will be the European parliamentary elections. And these European parliamentary elections are seen as important for many reasons, one of which is what kind of stand European countries should have vis-a-vis Ukraine. So there are two potential sources of politicization of this issue in the future. There are also important international factors in which public opinion can play a role. And this is related to one thing that we've been studying in class, meaning the fact that with our behavior, we signal something to both Ukraine and Russia. And what we signal is important for both Ukraine and Russia. What European Union has tried to signal right now and so far has been to show support, a unified support, a unitary support vis-a-vis the Ukrainian effort. And this has been a signal that apparently Russia has taken on board, has understood. Now, if for any reason this support might decline, this of course would be a worrisome signal for Ukraine and something to think over again for Russia. Might mean that there is some source of war fatigue that might affect our commitment to Ukraine. And you have seen from Anna's data that Ukrainians already think that we are doing not enough. While on the other hand, to anticipate something that I will say, many Europeans think that we are already doing too much vis-a-vis Ukraine. And this disconnect between this perception is a potential source of problems, not only between Ukraine and the EU, but also between EU and Russia, because it might give the wrong signal to Russia. Said that, let's see the data. The data we will be talking about are data taken from Eurobarometer, and this is a comparison that allows us to compare identical questions in two different periods of time, April and August of 2022 respectively and 2023, and we will be measuring different aspects of support for Ukraine. We will be measuring support for the effort, and you know that support for the effort is going on in different ways. We are supporting the Ukrainian shipping weapons. We are supporting the Ukrainians imposing sanctions on Russia. We are helping the Ukrainian from the financial side. We are helping Ukraine in welcoming migrants to Europe. So we are doing several things, and we want to see what's going on about this support between 2022 and 2023. Then we will look also at some potential sources of changes, if any, in the Ukrainian war, and we will look at three major sources. Support for what the European institutions are doing in Ukraine, trust in what both the EU and the political actors are doing about the war, and trust in the sources of information that we are getting that are providing us information about Ukraine. And we will see that this is an important element in explaining changes. Now, first point, how much change do we have and in which direction? What you see here is a set of slides that show for the 6 most relevant actions we are doing in order to help Ukraine: sanctions vis-a-vis sanctions against Russia, humanitarian aid, financial aid, arms shipment, supporting Ukrainian migrants, support the EU membership of Ukraine, what's going on between 2022 and 2023. Now, the main diagonal is where dots get located if there is no change. Any dot that is above this line means that support has been increasing. Any dot that is below this line means that support has been decreasing. As you can see, on most issues, with the partial exception of support for membership, support for what we are doing for Ukraine has been declining. More in some countries, less in other countries, but in almost all countries, support has been declining. The second piece of information we have from these slides is how the dots cluster together. The more the dots cluster together, the more Europe has a unified image of what's going on and what they are doing about Ukraine. The more the dots are spread across the line, the more difference there are among European countries. And what you can see is that there are issues on which the dots are very much close to one another, and one of it has to do with migrants and humanitarian aid. There are other issues on which there is a much larger variety, and arms shipment and sanctions are the two, so money and weapons are the two issues on which Europeans are more divided. So the message we bring home is that support is declining, and there is a variety of positions among European countries. This is so even if the Ukrainian war has had an impact, or if you want to say a positive impact on EU integration process in two different senses. First, the Ukrainian war, while shows sign of war fatigue, has boosted support for a common European security policy. As you can see, the same lines, the process is the same. Dots that are above the line for EU integration security are more than those who are below this line. And second, all this is happening even if the threat coming from the Russian attack to Ukraine is still with us. So people continue to be worried about this war. Now, if this is the situation, and here you see the variation across countries, these slides show which countries have changed the most. There are some that have changed for more than 10 points %. There are others that have changed only slightly. But as you can see, there is no country in which overall, for all the measures the EU is implementing to support the Ukrainian effort, on all measures, overall support has been declining. Not dramatically in some countries, probably not even statistically significant, but in others, yes. And for those of you who are Italians, you see that Italy has -8, is not far from Belgium, from France, and other countries. Now, what explains this change? Of course, I mean, there are many different sources, and we will look at 3 of them. Trust in information. You remember we studied, and sorry, Anton and Anna, for this parenthesis, but just to remember what we are doing in class, we have been studying the role of the media, and you know that everything we know, I mean, you know that our students in Kyiv cannot be with us because they are experimenting the war face to face. This is not the case for us. Most of us get news and get information from media sources. So how much trust do we have in the source of information? There can be authorities, either national or European, journalists, NGOs, is a key element to explain support. The second is the level of satisfaction with what we are doing, whether we are satisfied or dissatisfied with the way the EU has reacted to the war. And the third is attention for the issue. Of course, if you are more attentive, probably you are more concerned, and you also think that this is a more relevant topic to address than if you are not attentive. Now, what happens here is that there are different levels of attention, of satisfaction, and of trust toward what's going on in Ukraine. There are countries in which substantial minorities are negatively oriented toward Ukraine. They are not attentive, they don't like what the EU is doing, and they have a very low trust in the media environment that surrounds us. And there are others in which, on the contrary, this is seen as trustful, satisfied, and attentive. Now, based on these indicators, we find that countries have different orientations. Some countries are very negative. Greece is the most starting example. Others are very much supportive. Finland, Portugal, and Denmark are on the other side. So European countries are divided in their attitudes toward Ukraine. In some countries, majorities are untrustful what they're getting from the different sources. They don't like what the Europeans are doing, and they do not pay much attention to what's going on. In others, it's exactly the opposite. Now, this set of factors is important to explain support. Why? Because as this last slide shows, is that support that has been declining in all countries is much larger in those countries that in 2022 were already starting with negative orientations toward Ukraine. the more negative we were oriented toward Ukraine in 2022, so more distrustful, not satisfied, and not attentive you were, the more decline there will be in that country. The less negative are your orientation, the less will be the change between 2022 and 2023. This means, and this is the very last slide, that at the individual level, these three variables are extremely important in accounting what will be going on in the future. Why? Because increasing the level of attention, increasing satisfaction with what we are doing toward Ukraine, and increasing trust in the information we are getting will dramatically improve support for any and every measure that we are implementing to help Ukraine. The more, on the contrary, these variables go down, the less support we will be producing. I don't know whether this is a source of worries or concern for our Ukrainian friends. Clearly, it is for all of us who wants to see this war end, and this is another chapter which probably we will discuss later on during our conversation. But this is the situation in Europe right now. I stop here, and I leave the floor to our students and to us for asking questions and raise issues. And of course, Anna and Anton, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Let's see if the students have any. Lina, you want to break the ice? You can break the ice. Okay, he's not really a student, but he's a young professor. Come over here, otherwise they don't hear you.
Data that we have, saying that the satisfaction, for example, when you have Greece, so we can understand that, for example, Greece is not so much about Ukraine, but maybe that they don't trust the EU, they feel unsupported by the EU, they have domestic issues as financial crisis and the migration from the Mediterranean area. So how can you, in this data, also accord to the situation locally on why their opinion of support to Ukraine is like that and not vice versa? Because I'm Lithuanian, and also for us, it's the proximity. We trust EU. EU has supported us. So how do you take that data into account? Because maybe it's not because they don't support Ukraine. They just are not happy with the systems.
Okay, let's take other questions if there are. Otherwise, we will go with it. Any question? Yes. Okay, we have a student who has a question. Come over here, because otherwise they don't listen to you.
Just hello, good to see you. That's I'm Daniel. I'm from Iran. That I want to ask this question over. That's how Ukrainian to think about Iran's actions over the supporting and selling drone to Russians and somehow supporting Russians in the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Okay, Anna and Anton, just for your information, we have here a very diversified class of students. As a matter of fact, we have also some Ukrainians and some Russians in our class. So it would be very interesting to hear also their voice if they feel confident to do so. Other questions? Okay, there is another question from a student from Latin America, so far away from us.
Hi, Anna. My name is Karen. I'm from Chile. I'm so sorry for
You have to turn on the other side.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry for what you are crossing right now in your country, and I have two questions for you. One is, how do you feel about this? And you really think Ukraine have a chance for win this war against Russia? And the other one question is, the last week with the professor, we was learning about NATO. And I would like to know if Ukraine were part of NATO, will that help or could be worse? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, there is another question, then we start a round of answers. Come over here. I guess she's Ukrainian, so the usual suspect.
Доброго
Your
дня.
face and look at that.
Доброго дня. I have a
Because
question.
That means hello.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I have a question about the war fatigue. You mentioned it, and what can be done domestically in Ukraine, except for, spreading and sharing the information, because I know especially in Kyiv, it's a big problem, at least according to the news that I follow. And also what can be done in other European countries to deal with this. Thank you.
Okay, Anna, if you are in agreement, I'll stop here for the first round. I'll give you the floor.
Yes, thank you. For the first question, I get that it was more to your data, although I also think that when we were listening to the presentation, the question asked whether this is a trust in Ukraine, or like the attitude toward Ukraine, or whether there are other factors that may, and mainly the trust in media, for example, or in information people are getting, or in the institutions, that also can figure in, or can have a role in factor in this data. But this question I will leave to you, because you will, I think, more competent to answer that. So the question regarding Iran. I would say that from all polls and surveys I've seen, Iran is not really mentioned often when people are asked about attitudes to different countries, and to countries that are kind of not our allies, but allies of Russia, or let's say proclaim themselves as more or less neutral. Just for this, I would say the sake of validity of data, not many countries are put in this list. So we usually end up, let's say, on the other side with Russia, Belarus, and China. And I would say, for example, the attitudes toward China are very negative, like not that negative as toward Russia or Belarus, but rather negative. So in answering the question about Iran, I can only refer to what we actually see on social media or in information. So it will be more like hearsay data or from different interviews. And of course, like I would say that attitude is rather negative, as for example, all these Shahid drones that we attack quite frequently. Everyone knows that Iran is supplying them to Russia. So in this light, it's hard to have any positive opinion about Iran. Although I also would say that in discourses regarding Iran, or the support or like differentiating between regime and people, Iran's protest of last year and the year before that, quite like these protests, mass protests, quite often are mentioned as example where people can protest. So I would say that there could be there could be a place, or a space for distinguishing between the regime and the society, but unfortunately we do not know a lot about Iran's society and and whether what they would support, or how much they support regime in helping Russia. Regarding the like my feelings toward what I'm feeling now, I actually never know how to answer this question. I live and we live in Ukraine. Like I actually live in Kyiv, so I travel some, but I'm mainly here, and I would say that on some level. On one hand, the war is always there, but on the other hand, I do still have my life, and if I would be thinking every second about how awful it is, I wouldn't be able to live and to function. So basically, you have to keep yourself together to be able to function. Regarding the question, and I think about the chance to win, as you've seen from the data that we presented, it was the first slide. Like over 90% of Ukrainians actually think that the war would be won. And almost 70, like 68, think that it will be all the territories that are internationally recognized will be gained and returned to Ukraine. So I would say that Ukrainians are rather optimistic and very optimistic here. I'm also optimistic here. If people didn't think that there is a chance to win, if society didn't think that there is a chance to win, then no one will be fighting. You know, like if you do not think that you stand a chance, you won't really fight. The question is that you may think it, and as we see, like. Important point here that this war is perceived as existential war. So, and that is partly my answer to the war fatigue question, because it doesn't matter if there is a war fatigue. There is no other alternative. And I actually think that the data from the surveys and polls do not show the war fatigue. So it comes from, I don't know, if I read through Facebook, I see a lot of discussions of that, but if you actually look at the data, you do not see a lot of or rising war fatigue, and partly that is because this war is perceived as existential war. So either Ukraine will win, or there will be no more Ukraine and Ukrainians. So it's the zero-sum game in a way. Yeah, and the question about NATO, I almost forgot about that. You actually raise a point about which is debated a lot. In Ukraine. On one hand, there is a belief. I would say the majority of Ukrainians believe that if Ukraine were in NATO, it won't be attacked, or there won't be a full-scale invasion. On the other hand, I know that a lot of, I would say, experts speculate whether indeed there is any truth in this belief. So we see that people believe, and that's why majority want to join NATO, because NATO is seen as a kind of a safeguard against invasion or against the threat by Russia. On the other hand, I know that this seems quite debated quite a lot by experts, whether whether indeed it would prevent the full-scale invasion. It would have prevented, but we can only speculate about that now. Yeah, so I think that I more or less covered all points.
Thank you, Anna. Let me answer to the question about what is behind it. Let me make this distinction between proximate causes and structural causes. What we have been analyzing in the regression and in the data I showed were the proximate causes. I mean, the fact that people apparently that are more dissatisfied with the kind of information they are getting, those who are less trustful of institutions are clearly more negative about Ukraine. Now, what drives these sentiments? This is another question, and of course, this is a question that is very much related to debates about what has been changing in our societies. I mean, I'm talking here of the EU society, but this is true also for the US, because we didn't mention the US, but the US pattern is very similar to some European countries, as a matter of fact. Heavy or strong division between left and right on whether to support Ukraine and how to support Ukraine, and a general decline in some sectors, but not in others. Now, to me, if you ask for the structural causes, since we are talking about public opinion, the structural causes have to be traced to the political discourse in many of these countries. And so, to make the answer simple, those countries who have been gone through populist government that were sympathetic to Russia, even after the 2014 Crimean War, that have been fostering, thanks to COVID, conspiracy theories about what were the sources of COVID and so forth and so on, are the countries in which Ukraine is less there is less sympathy for Ukraine, less support for Ukraine than those countries that have not gone through this experience. So the Ukraine arrives at the end of a period in which the migrant crisis, the financial crisis, the COVID crisis, and eventually the Ukrainian war have produced an electorate in some countries, fueled by parties in these countries, that makes a connection between all these factors. The word for calling this phenomenon is populism, or the brand of populism that is more isolationist and more reluctant to get committed to multilateral activities. I think we can go now for a second round of questions. I have a question myself, but I will wait. Other questions? Come over here. Okay. Tell your name.
Oh, well, okay. It's a little bit strange. Okay. Well, my name is Daria, and I want to ask two little questions. Actually, I have to say that I'm from Russia and I'm against war. I never supported Putin, but it's not the matter of this question. I wanted to ask you about first the Western Ukraine, the Eastern, sorry, and what Ukraine will do with these people and with these territories, because there are actually a lot of persons who really feel themselves like Russians. Actually, I have a lot of friends from different parts of Ukraine and from Eastern Ukraine too, and they said they were bombed by their own government, and it's very strange to say nowadays that they are Ukrainians. So it's a very difficult problem. And if Ukraine will return these territories, what will they do with this situation? And the first question is about, well, actually, I really forgot something that I would like to say. The first question was about Russians and what should we do to support Ukraine and not to be in prison or killed, because it's really difficult nowadays in our country to be like against our authorities, and we would like to do something, but we don't know what we could do in this situation, because the risks are too high, and every time we try to do something, there is telling us that it's not enough, and it's a little bit upset because there are not the whole country against the war. And this is the problem, because the persons who are against war, they're trying to do something, but it's firstly difficult, it's very risky, and on the other hand, they see in the Ukraine reaction that it's not enough. Every time it's not enough. And I guess that it would be better to support these people, because they are not they're not very much of them, and who trying to do something. So this is 2 questions.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Okay, while they are thinking over, let me ask you one. Oops, what I did. I did something wrong? No, okay. So, okay, I push a button too much. Now, let me ask you also one question, Anna, to you. I mean, one point on which there is a real dissonance between European public opinion and the Ukrainian public opinion is related to the likelihood of complete victory, because this is what your data show. As a matter of fact, in many European countries, this idea is starting to get a grip that the only solution is a compromise in which some territories are given up to Russia, the ones like Crimea and maybe some areas in Donbas and Donetsk, and Ukraine in exchange get full independence and possibly NATO and EU membership. And so less and less people in many European countries believe Ukraine can win. Now, my question to you is how this is going to play, because of course, for you, as you said, and I think you are right, this is an existential crisis. For many Europeans, it's becoming, and I'm sorry to use this blunt word, is more of a nuisance than everything else, because there are many other problems that apparently are pressing the Europeans, and having this war is clearly disturbing. So how do you see the future for Ukraine and the EU, especially considering that there will be a EU parliamentary election soon? Other questions? Is a question or is... No, it's not a question. Okay, Anna, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will probably start with your question. I would say that we do have to distinguish between what people say they would be in polls. They answer about how they envision the ideal situation in a way. I would say that there is an understanding that there could be a situation where there will be that there will be negotiations at some point, and that there will be probably some kind of compromise. But the question is, there are conditions on which negotiations at which point negotiations can happen or can take place, and for that there should be we would say a fair will at the other side to actually negotiate and to keep to their side of agreement. And at the point that we are now, there can't be any negotiations, because they will be only used by Russia to accumulate more sources and to restart the war anew. So basically, for there to be a situation or a point at which negotiations can happen, Russia has to suffer a rather significant loss. The question is when and where it will happen. Before that, there will be no potential will at our opponent's side to actually keep their side of agreement, whether any could be negotiated. And I'm not a military expert, but I know that quite a lot of people speculate that the loss of Crimea can be such point, because Crimea is like more isolated geographically. It's easier to isolate geographically than, let's say, Donbass, some areas of Donbass or Luhansk Oblast and so on. But again, I'm not a military expert, so basically there should be some gainings at our side, and our allies' side, at military field, before there could be any negotiations which have a chance to be long-standing and to be upheld. Because all the previous, before the full-scale invasion, 8 years of negotiating with Russia has shown that it's not worth anything. So it's just no agreement was upheld. So I would say that there is an understanding that it might be that there won't be a full-scale victory in the society, but we are not at the point now when negotiations could be started, or when any negotiations could be started. So that's, and I would say that, of course, I don't know from the public opinion side, but I from what I see on expert and political side, I think that there is an understanding of that within our international partners also. And in that regard, I actually wanted to remark on this slide about whether European support is seen as sufficient. I would say that we have to understand here that for Ukrainians, the first thing they think about when they think about support, international support, is a military and arms supply support. The results and data should be seen from this angle. So of course, if you would start asking about different and other kinds of support on migrants, financial support, some reform support, and so on, then you will have a quite different results. But if you ask overall, people will immediately think about military support and arms supply, and that influence the results.
Are the ones that are more problematic for the Europeans and the Americans. Is the one in which there is less support both in Europe and in the United States.
Yeah, and that's and that's understandable. I can understand that. Then the question about about east in the east of Ukraine. We have to distinguish here between people on the territories that's been occupied from 2014 and people on the rest of east of Ukraine, because east of Ukraine is not just parts of Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, or well, Crimea is not an east at all, but we will put it, for the sake of the argument, we'll put it also here. Indeed, there's been more pro-Russian sentiment in the government-controlled territories of east of Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. But what we actually see after the full-scale invasion, that this support, or this, I would say, pro-Russian or anti-Western or Euro-Atlantic orientation disappeared. Because what we have now is a consolidation of the people in all of the territories of Ukraine, whether it will be in the east or in the center, are more or less consolidated. So we can think about like 6% differences, but it's not, well, while it could be statistically significant, it's not significant enough when we are talking about numbers like 70+%. So basically, what we actually that is not to say that we won't have a problem that I think Daria mentioned with some people who are on the territories that's been occupied from 2014. Especially as a lot of them has been pulled into and mobilized into Russian army or other military units and actually been fighting against Ukraine, which then shows and of course it doesn't help their families to feel pro-Ukraine sentiments and so on. But I would say that this is the topic that's discussed a lot on all levels of from civil society experts to the policy makers, and from what we see from the territories that's been deoccupied, and of course it's territories that's been from maximum 1 year under occupation, that majority of those who collaborated with the occupant forces actually left with these occupant forces. And those who stayed are those who didn't have a very, I would say, significant sentiment, pro-Russian sentiment. So we might end up with people who do not like Ukraine, but that doesn't mean that they like Russia anymore. So, and from what we see from the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk now, it's actually that majority of people do not like any country, let's say. So they basically want to be left alone and to have their basic needs satisfied, because and of course that will be a problem, but I wouldn't overestimate the amount of sentiment for Russia and against Ukraine in the temporary occupied territories, even talking about the territories occupied from 2014, because without Russia's instigations and help and support, neither of these territories, neither parts of Donetsk or Luhansk or Crimea would ever decide to separate or to decide to go to Russia. It's totally instigated from outside. There was not enough sentiment or will to do anything, and basically, and we also have data from autumn of 2013 and the winter of December 2013, that shows that majority still support in this region, over around half of population actually would still vote for Ukrainian independence, because that's been the question asked. Would you vote for Ukrainian independence? So over 50% in each of these regions said yes. And then in 2 months think that people somehow change their opinions, it doesn't happen like that. They didn't change in 20 years before that. Why would they change within months or two? Of course, that is not to say that they might not like particular decisions or particular ideas and so on. And of course, we will have people with pro-Russian sentiment left in Ukraine, but as long as they haven't done anything criminal or punishing, which is against the law, they don't have anything to fear in this regard. What Russians have to do? I don't know what Russians have to do. You know, if we look at Russian regime now, of course, people are very limited in what they can do. They can't protest, do a mass protest, and they can't help in many ways. But what they can do is, and I know there are certain initiatives that help Ukrainians who are trying to leave the occupied areas through Russia, to actually leave Russia and move to the other countries. And I know quite a lot of initiatives are within Russia which help these people. So that's one of the ways to help. Another, I would say probably the reason for Ukrainians are not willing to distinguish between different Russians, or or look deeply inside Russian society, is because for two reasons, I would say. For one, because majority think that Russians haven't done enough when they had chance to do something. So of course you can't protest now, but if there will be a mass protest, a real mass protest, let's say on the 24th of February, then the situation will be different. And by real mass protest, I do not mean 10 or even 15,000 in Moscow. I mean like a couple of millions in Moscow. So that is the scale of the protest that is considered to be a mass protest in Ukraine, especially seeing that more than a third of Ukrainians have relatives in Russia. So, and or even rather closer to 2/3 of Ukrainians. And we actually, I didn't think of showing this data today, but we actually asked, had a survey where we asked people whether they have relatives in Russia, and whether anyone of their relatives or friends in Russia were supportive of Ukraine in either they've done something or even said something to them. And around 2/3 of Ukrainians said that they did have relatives, and out of these people who had relatives, less than a third said that they have at least one person who supported them. So that means that the 2/3 of Ukrainians, their relatives didn't support, or rather they haven't done or said anything to show their disagreement with the government policy. And that is why Ukrainians feel the way they feel. You know, you can be against, but if you haven't done anything, it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, it works like that. So, and of course, we don't want people to go to jail because they went to or said something. No one will be happy for that. But but that's but actually to support your relatives or your friends in a friendly chat or in a I don't know, in a private communication, that for many that would be enough, and that would be that actually will show the support. Unfortunately, that's not the situation. So unfortunately, we have a different data and different personal experiences. So and again, for a lot of Ukrainians, the Putin and his regime and is the result of Russian society and what's been done, or rather not done, 10 or 20 years before that. Of the sentiment that I'm not, politics is the dirty thing, that that is not my business, that I do not care about politics. It's not like I care only about my life, and so on and so forth. And when we look before the full-scale invasion, that is the prevalent sentiment within Russian society. So when we look where there's been no significant mass protest against regime starting from 2012 or even 2011. So there's been, and I'm sorry, but 50,000 in Moscow doesn't count. Moscow is 9 million. So when we talk about mass protest, that means like significant mass protests, mass numbers. That and of course, I actually think that Ukraine have to support people who are jailed for supporting Ukraine in Russia, and probably even exchange them for war prisoners and so on, and or offer some different opportunities. But from the picture we see from our side, we actually can't say that it's a Putin's war. We only can say that it's Russia's war. It's a whole society war, and part of that is also shown of that there was no like, for example, in this mobilization that's been done last year in Russia, if someone refused, they wouldn't face significant punishment. And we actually haven't seen any significant numbers refusing. So that's I understand that I might not kind of be very supportive, but that's to explain probably our perspective on that.
Thank you, Anna. There are a last round of questions to which I ask you, Anna, to give very short answers because we have to leave the class in 15 minutes. We have our student again, and then there is another question over there, and then maybe Carlotta has a question too.
So I will be a bit obnoxious on this one. I'm sorry. You mentioned that the territorial compromise is possible, and I get this. There is a lot of controversy about it. But if Ukraine gives up some part of its territory, even if it's like Crimea, which has been occupied since 2014, wouldn't it show other countries, other authoritarian regimes that, okay, you can come here, you can kill people, you can occupy the land, and you can leave unpunished? Like, we have super tense relationships between China and Taiwan. What will happen to Taiwan if this is the case? And as for the Russian protests, I also wanted to make a remark that I'm not an expert on Russian history, but I know that in 1991, 500,000 people, or maybe even more, went to protest in Moscow. And in 2014, there was 0. So,
thank you, and you are next. Thank you.
Вітаю. I wanted to ask about the role of Ukrainian public opinion, specifically the perception of Ukrainian public opinion from the West, and if it has any effect on the attitudes towards supporting the Ukrainian cause, or just in general, like more of a people-to-people kind of relationship. Because as we know, these kinds of relationships are the foundation of the social help that a lot of Ukrainians receive abroad. So if there is no good attitude towards the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian cause, it's less likely that we will be helped on a more personal, human level, let's say it like that. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for the debate. I was just wondering whether there had been any change in the trust and support for the government in Ukraine over the last year and a half. I mean, if you have any data on that, because I remember that at the beginning there was a very strong support, and generally wondering that because I haven't seen much data on it. So thank you.
Anna?
Yeah, I will try to be brief. Well, I mentioned some compromise. I didn't exactly said that it will be a territorial compromise. It could be, but actually I do not see Crimea as a matter of compromise. I think that more potentially there could be a compromise, but it doesn't necessarily have to be territorial, but we'll talk. That will be a milestone to talk or thing to talk when we come to this point. It's certainly, well, as I mentioned before, I think that it's highly unlikely it will be about Crimea. Whether it will give any signal, well, yeah, any kind of territorial compromise will give a bad signal to, well, that's why, and that's why I actually think that I would rather say that I would bet on not a territorial compromise, but some other, partly for this reason. But in a way, we're not discussing the possible scenarios for the end now. So I will stop at this point. Another question. What about the trust in government and in the president? This is asked almost every month by different company, and what we actually see that from the at the moment of full-scale invasion, the trust grew significantly, and the support for the government and the president grew significantly. It was like unseen before numbers for Ukraine, which actually have a history of a very low institutional trust. What we see now that this consolidation of society is lessening, and trust is also falling down a bit. And while but still over half of population, or like say that they trust in government and in different institutions. There will be different numbers. And also from the 2014, the highest level of trust is into the armed forces of Ukraine, and that is still this way. It's in 90s, like more than 90%, around 90% have trust in the military Ukraine armed forces. And president, from the most recent poll, I think the president have a second second place in this rating on the trust. So on one hand, to be short, we do see trust getting lower, but it's still much more than it was before the full-scale invasion.
Anna, there is also the question about the role of Ukrainians abroad in supporting Ukrainians.
I actually don't know how well. Don't really know. I don't think that there is a lot of research done on that because it's hard to have a representative. You can have online panel on Ukrainians abroad, but you will have obvious problems with representation here. But this role is, I would say, I would perceive this role as rather high because it could work both ways, as supporting those who are inside Ukraine and also as establishing networks and connections with people in the countries that they are at the moment.
Okay, I think the time is right for closing our session. I thank Anton and Anna for their kind and interesting presentation, for their forthcoming attitude, and I'm sorry that the students couldn't come up, but clearly we understand the situation, obviously, and there will be a record of this webinar for those of you who want to see it again, and thank you very much also to Tiziano for arranging this, and see you soon, Anna and Anton.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Either in Italy or in Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you
As
very much.
We would like to come, but there was problems last time.
Yeah. Well, I hope next time it will back. Thank you very much for the interesting data also, and for the questions, and for this opportunity.
Thank you. Bye now.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.